Back in 1999, the world of video games was at its peak. And not because they were the best of the best, but because it was something completely new. That year, Nintendo, the gaming giant that brought us Mario and Zelda, is about to release their latest blockbuster, Donkey Kong 64. There's a lot of anticipation. Fans are chomping at the bit, ready to dive into what promises to be the next big thing in 3D platforming. But success in the gaming world isn't always as straightforward as it seems. It's not just about sales figures or critical acclaim. Sometimes a game's legacy can be as complex and winding as a jungle path. And boy, does Donkey Kong 64 have a jungle of a story to tell. So, was Donkey Kong 64 a success? Well, grab your banana horde and strap in, because we're about to go on a wild ride through the highs, lows, and everything in between of this controversial classic. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? We're talking about a world where 3D gaming was still relatively new. Super Mario 64 had blown everyone's minds just a few years earlier, and developers were scrambling to make the next big 3D hit. And then, Rare enters the chat. The British developer had already struck gold with Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. They had a reputation for pushing boundaries, and they were determined to make Donkey Kong 64 the biggest, most ambitious game the Nintendo 64 had ever seen. And they weren't kidding around. This game was so massive it required the Nintendo 64 expansion pack, a memory upgrade that came bundled with the game. Now, let's talk numbers for a second. When Donkey Kong 64 hit the shelves, it was like a gorilla-sized meteor striking the gaming landscape. It sold well, moving over 5 million copies worldwide. In the 1999 holiday season, it was Nintendo's top seller, helping them fend off competition from Sega's shiny new Dreamcast console. On paper, that sounds like a slam dunk success, right? But hold on. Because success in the gaming world isn't always that simple. Sure, Donkey Kong 64 was a commercial hit, but its legacy? Well, that's where things get a bit bananas, pun intended. Let's dive into the game itself. Donkey Kong 64 wasn't just big in sales, it was big in every sense of the word. The game featured not one, not two, but 5 playable Kongs, each with their own unique abilities. You had Donkey Kong himself, of course, along with his little buddy Diddy, but then Rare threw in 3 new characters: Lanky Kong, Chunky Kong, and Tiny Kong. In theory, this sounds great. More characters, more variety, more fun, right? Well, not quite. See, each of these characters had their own set of collectibles, and when I say collectibles, I mean collectibles. Bananas, coins, blueprints, berries, you name it, Donkey Kong 64 had it. And you needed to collect them all, with each character in each level. If you're starting to feel overwhelmed just thinking about it, you're not alone. This is where we start to see cracks in DK64's banana-shaped armor. The game was huge, sure, but was it fun? For many players, the answer was a resounding kinda? The sheer amount of stuff to collect and backtracking required to do so left many gamers feeling more exhausted than excited. It's like Rare took the collectathon formula that had worked so well in games like Banjo-Kazooie and cranked it up to 11 and then some. But let's not throw the baby out with the banana bathwater just yet. Donkey Kong 64 had its fair share of innovations and memorable moments. The boss battles, for instance, were often praised for their creativity and challenge. And who can forget the infamous DK rap that opened the game? It was so bad it was good, becoming a meme before memes were even a thing. Speaking of the DK rap, the truth is that the game's soundtrack, composed by the legendary Grant Kirkhope, was a highlight for many players. From the atmospheric jungle beats to the catchy character themes, the soundtrack added a layer of charm to the game that's still appreciated by fans today. Yeah, even that rap. But charm and catchy tunes can only take a game so far. As players dug deeper into DK64, many found themselves facing a game that was, well, a bit of a mess. The character switching mechanic, which required players to backtrack through levels multiple times with different Kongs, quickly went from novel to tedious. The minigames, while numerous, often felt more like busy work than fun diversions. And then there were the graphics. Now, it's important to remember that this was 1999, okay? We can't be too demanding. 3D graphics were still relatively new at the time, and expectations were different. But even by the standards of that time, Donkey Kong 64 was a mixed bag. While some areas of the game looked lush and vibrant, others felt barren and uninspired. The character models, while expressive, often looked a bit off. But despite the flaws and despite the frustration it caused many players, Donkey Kong 64 still managed to garner critical acclaim upon release. Many reviewers praised its massive scope and variety of gameplay. It won awards, including Best Platform Game at E3 1999. So, success, right? Well, not so fast. See, the thing about video games is their legacies often evolve over time, and Donkey Kong 64's legacy? It's complicated. In the years following its release, DK64 began to be seen as something of a warning story in game design. It became the poster child for the excesses of the collectathon platformer, a genre that would soon fall out of favor as gamers sought new experiences, and the game's impact on the DK franchise itself is particularly telling. After DK64, the series went quiet for a long time, and when it did return, it was with games that were markedly different in style and scope. It's as if Nintendo looked at DK64 and said, maybe we went a bit too far with this one. But here's where the story takes another twist. In recent years, there's been something of a reassessment of DK64. As gamers who grew up with the title have gotten older, many have looked back on it with a mix of nostalgia and newfound appreciation. Yes, it was flawed, yes, it was excessive, but it was also ambitious, quirky, and undeniably memorable. So was DK64 ahead of its time? Did it suffer from trying to do too much with the limited tech from the era? Or was it simply a case of a developer getting carried away with their own ambitions? These questions bring us to an important point in our story. The success or failure of a video game isn't always black and white. It's not just about sales figures or review scores. Sometimes a game's true impact only becomes clear years after its release. And in the case of DK64, its influence can be seen in unexpected places. The game's excess became a reference point for developers, a lesson in what not to do. But at the same time, its ambition and scope inspired others to push boundaries in their own ways. Take, for example, the recent resurgence of 3D platformers. Games like Yooka-Laylee or A Hat in Time have looked back to the era of DK64 for inspiration, while also learning from its mistakes. They've taken the collectathon formula and refined it, creating experiences that capture the spirit of the classics while avoiding their pitfalls. And let's not forget about speedrunning. DK64, with its massive world and numerous collectibles, has become a favorite among speedrunners. These dedicated gamers have turned the game's excessive nature into a virtue, creating intricate routes and strats to complete the game as fast as possible. In this context, the very things that frustrated casual players have become challenges to be overcome, puzzles to be solved. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of DK64's legacy is how it affected Rare itself. The game marked something of a turning point for the developer. After DK64, Rare's output began to change. Their games became darker, more mature. Titles like Conker's Bad Fur Day and Perfect Dark showed a studio moving in a new direction, away from the family-friendly fare they were known for. This shift eventually led to Rare's acquisition by Microsoft in 2002, marking the end of their long and fruitful relationship with Nintendo. While it would be oversimplified to say that DK64 directly caused this, it's hard not to see it as a pivotal moment in Rare's history. So, after all this, we come back to our original question. Was Donkey Kong 64 a success? The answer, like the game itself, is complex. In terms of sales and initial reception, absolutely. It was a commercial hit that received plenty of praise upon release. But in terms of its long-term impact on the DK franchise and the platforming genre as a whole, that's where things get murky. DK64 is a game that pushed boundaries, for better and for worse. It showed what was possible in terms of scope and ambition, but also demonstrated the pitfalls of trying to do too much. It's a game that's simultaneously praised for its ambition and criticized for its excess. In many ways, DK64 is a perfect encapsulation of its era. It represents the tail end of 3D platforming's golden age. A last hurrah before the gaming landscape changed dramatically with the arrival of new consoles and new genres. It's a game that swung for the fences, and while it didn't quite knock it out of the park, it certainly left a lasting impression. And if you really think about it, perhaps the truest measure of DK64's success is the fact that we're still talking about it today. I mean, we're talking about that in this video, about a game that's almost 30 years old that's kind of turning into a legend. So again, was DK64 a success? Well, it's bananas, really. So let's wrap it up with the best beat of all, the DK rap. Because if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the DK rap is both the best and the worst thing to come out of this game. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like this video, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that bell. See you next time.